All right, giving this one another go here. This is attempt number 2 at having a podcast here on Tuesday night, a Panther-Lair Show podcast. We'll see if all the cockroaches crawled out of the wires and everything. Things were not working on our first attempt at 8:30 here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, but we are back, and now it appears that we do have audio. I'm glad that the microphone that was plugged in is now actually working. It was plugged in before, I promise. It's just I was talking and you couldn't hear me. So, yeah, I love it when the technology works. I need to I need to test these things before I fire it up. I think that's the problem. I need to double check and test the technology and make sure everything's sort of operational before I click go live. But we are here. It's Panther-Lair Show here on a Tuesday night, March 23rd. Going live here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You can listen to the podcast throughout the week, of course, but the real fun, the real action happens on Tuesday nights at 8:30 every week, and where we get to hang out and have a little conversation. We appreciate it, S-Mac, for jumping in on the live stream chat already, saying that the audio is good. Scott Lynch saying the audio sounds good. S-Mac, you were helping me out. You told me on the on our first attempt that you couldn't hear me, so that's how I knew that things were not working. Tim Fairley giving the thumbs up. We appreciate it. Everybody who's tuned in already. Michael B jumping in as a super chatter. We're going to get to you in 1 second, buddy. And we're going to get to everyone's comments and questions and thoughts on Pitt sports. That's what we do here on the Panther-Lair Show. The website, of course, is Panther-Lair.com. It's Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Football, basketball, recruiting. We cover it all at Panther-Lair.com. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we have message boards that are active 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Constantly conversations and discussions going on there at Panther-Lair.com. Just about everything going on in Pitt sports. Football, basketball, recruiting, baseball, volleyball, wrestling. I mean, there are conversations all over the place at Panther-Lair.com. And then I always like to say that, for 1 hour every Tuesday night, we get together here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com and we talk a little Pitt sports. We have this conversation right here. It's like we bring the message boards to YouTube for a live stream. And the fun part of this is, I used to do this podcast, just me sitting down here in the Panther-Lair studios and, pushing record and taping an audio podcast. Well, now we can actually have a little bit of engagement, a little bit of back and forth with the live stream, the chat function, and you can post your comments or questions, reactions to things I say, or, whatever's on your mind about Pitt sports, and we can talk about it right here on the Panther-Lair Show. It makes it a little bit more fun to go back and forth. And people already jumping in. Like I said, Michael B is a super chatter. We appreciate his support for the podcast big time. And we are going to get to you right off the bat. I got to give a quick shout out, of course, to homefieldapparel.com. I've got my yellow Warm Up the Victory Lights shirt. I feel like I wear this every Tuesday night. I'll mix it up, maybe next week, or see if Homefield wants to give me some new shirts. But I mean, they're great shirts. If you don't know homefieldapparel.com, then you're probably not on Twitter, because they are a very good brand on Twitter, and they make a great product. And you can see the design. Warm Up the Victory Lights. It's got sort of a retro feel to it. So they have a lot of great designs, very cool designs, but it's a very high quality shirt. It's very soft, holds its shape, it holds its form. You wash t-shirts, after a while, they start to lose their shape and lose their form. That hasn't happened with Home Field. And I have a sweatshirt from them too, and it hasn't happened there either. That's the thing I hate the most, is when sweatshirts and t-shirts start losing their shape, and then it gets really frustrating to me. So Home Field, that's not happening. You got to go check them out. Homefieldapparel.com. Really high quality stuff. And, Pitt logos, Pitt graphics, Pitt designs, and then a lot of other schools that they have they're licensed with as well. So we're going to jump into the Pitt conversation here tonight. And, Michael B jumped in as a super chatter, and we appreciate your support with the podcast, man. And right off the bat, he's asking about Justin Champagnie. And that's our big news story. Let's set the table here before we dig into the conversation about it. It's where we were going to start tonight anyway. The big news came out here Tuesday afternoon around 3 o'clock. Justin Champagnie announced he's going to explore the NBA draft process. And I think this is what most people expected to happen. It's a pretty, I mean, it's the most reasonable course for Justin Champagnie to take. It's the most logical thing for him to do at this point, and it's sort of a great arrangement. It's a great setup that the NCAA has, where players can explore the draft process. But as long as they don't hire an NBA agent, they can come back to college. So you can really find out what your prospects are and what your opportunities are, and how it looks for you for the future of whether or not you're going to get drafted and where you likely would get drafted. And if it doesn't sit right with you, if you feel like you can do better, you can come back. Now, in football, they do have a process where you can put out for evaluations. You can put into the NFL for a draft grade, which, just real quickly on the NFL side of things, there's a misconception about what kind of feedback you get. The actual feedback you get from the NFL, they basically either tell you you're a first-round pick, you're a second-round pick, or you should go back to school. I mean, that's largely what it comes down to. He got a 4th round grade back from the NFL. He got a day 3 grade back from the NFL. You may have scouts that tell you things. You may have NFL agents or coaches that pass word along, hey, this guy's probably a 4th round pick. But when you put in for evaluation, you put in your papers to the NFL for an evaluation, you're going to get a 1st round grade, a 2nd round grade, or a go back to school grade. And so guys that tell you they got a 6th round grade, they didn't get that from the NFL, or a 4th round grade. They didn't get that from the NFL. Now, in the NBA, I'm not exactly sure about the specific process. I don't know it is detailed quite as well, maybe because Pitt hasn't had that many guys explore the process over the years. But what Justin Champagnie is going to be able to do now is workouts and evaluations and get a real sense from the NBA of where he stands. And Jeff Capel is going to be able to assist in that process, of course. Justin Champagnie's family is going to be highly involved. I would assume Justin's brother, Julian Champagnie at St. John's, is going to go through the same process, and they're going to find out what they can find out about what makes the most sense for their future. Does it make the most sense for them to go back to college next season and continue developing their game and play themselves into surefire first-round picks, potential lottery picks? Or are they at a high enough level now that if they don't go in the first round, they'll go in the top half of the second round or so and get decent money and start making money to play the game and develop their games in the NBA? I don't know what that process is going to bring for Justin Champagnie. I don't know what kind of feedback he's going to get. I don't know what kind of evaluations he's going to receive, and I don't know what they're going to tell him. NBA, I shouldn't say NBA, but agents will tell you that you're going to get drafted at a certain level. Agents, I feel like agents probably, they don't want to oversell things, but they're probably going to give you the best possible, outcome. I think you're going to try and count on scouts and the feedback that your coaches get. And, if you trust them, if you believe that Jeff Capel's got your best interest at heart, then you're going to have him working the phones, and you're going to take the feedback that comes from him and consider it all and make your decision if you're Justin Champagnie. So Michael B. opens the conversation with a question about Champagnie. What's my feel as of tonight on Champagnie coming back to Pitt? I don't know. I don't know. If you had asked me a week ago, what do I think? I was sort of leaning slightly toward Champagnie coming back for a variety of reasons. This announcement, this decision doesn't necessarily change my opinion on it. It doesn't make me feel differently about the prospects of Champagnie leaving or coming back. I think he's got things he could definitely improve on if he were to come back. That could make him a higher draft pick. I think his defense could be better. I think obviously creating his own shot could be better. Being a better shooter, developing an outside shooting game could be better. But at the same time, he's accomplished a whole lot in college. Nobody else in a Power 5 conference averaged a double-double this past season. Nobody else. There are about 10 or 12 guys in the nation who averaged double-doubles, and they were in the WAC and the SWAC and Horizon League and here and there. Nobody else in a Power 5 conference, one of those high major conferences, nobody else averaged a double-double other than Justin Champagnie. He has played at a high level in college. It remains to be seen if he feels like some of those details, some of those things that are truly going to separate him as a player in the NBA, developing an outside shot, more of an outside shot, being able to create his own shot, improving his defense. It depends if he believes how much improvement he can make in those areas, and whether that improvement can translate to, or what, sort of elevated draft pick that improvement translates to. And I don't know. I don't know what the process is going to tell him. I don't know what the feedback is going to give to him. And I don't know what he and his family are going to decide. Obviously Pitt would very much like to have Justin Champagnie back. Pitt would very much benefit from having Justin Champagnie back. We're seeing their efforts in the transfer portal and working on recruits. We're seeing them come further into focus. Sort of every day we see them attached to new transfer candidates. And I've talked about this over the last couple of weeks about, you get a transfer big man in, and then maybe you get John Hughley back, or maybe you don't, but you get a transfer big man in, you get a transfer guard, you bring in a high school guy or two, and you get Justin Champagnie back, and you've got a legitimate competitive ACC roster. We've been talking about Jared West, point guard from Marshall, who went into the transfer portal this week and seems like a high candidate for Pitt. He had a Zoom call with the Pitt coaches tonight, actually. About an hour or so before we started this podcast, he had a Zoom call with the Pitt coaches. And, if you see me glancing away, it might be because I'm communicating with him sort of as we're taping this podcast. But he's, a likely candidate probably to end up transferring to Pitt. I think Pitt has a really good chance of landing him. He's a really good guard, could play with or behind Femi Odikale, next to him or rotate with him. He's a pretty solid shooter. He's a really good defender. He can make some plays and would be a good addition. I feel like things are coming into focus with how this roster could be constructed for the coming season, and how it could be constructed in a rather productive way, in a rather successful and competitive way. But a whole lot of the equation hinges on what Justin Champagnie chooses to do. And this is what we've talked about this since the season ended, of how important that decision is, how large it looms over everything in terms of projection for next season. And so now we watch it. We took a step. I think we got some insight into Justin Champagnie's thought process with this announcement here on Tuesday. And now we'll see where he goes from here. And it'll be interesting to see. Michael B says, does the Milan Brown interest surprise you? It does me. Jeff Capel needs to shake up his staff, in my opinion. Yeah, Milan Brown, his name has been linked a little bit to the College of Charleston job. He was an assistant coach there before. He has been a head coach in the past. Does it surprise me to see his name linked to it? I don't know. Pitt hasn't, as a program, had, so much success that you say, boy, they're going to be looking to come and poach Pitt's assistant coaches. But he is a guy with head coaching experience. He's a guy with experience at the College of Charleston. So it's not terribly surprising. The name sort of makes sense. Let me see here. TRR says, doesn't Justin Champagnie need to play the 3 in college to better himself for the NBA? Maybe. I think the way Pitt plays, he could show his ability as a 3, even if he's playing the 4. You know what I mean? With the way he moves around and the types of things he does and the types of things Pitt asks him to do and how he operates in their offense. He's not playing as a small forward. He's not playing a 3. He is playing the 4, but it kind of, I think he gets opportunities to shoot. I think he gets opportunities where he catches the ball and could potentially do something to create with the ball that he'd be asked to do as a 3 in the NBA. He could be a smaller 4 in the NBA and a guy who can step out and shoot, but he's got to develop that part of his game a little bit more. You know what I mean? He has to get stronger in that regard. And, that's potentially something he could do, if he were to come back for another year of college. That's potentially something he could develop if he came back for another year of college. Matt Durney says, I missed a couple months of these live streams. Well, hey, Matt, we're happy to have you back, man. I'm glad you made it back for this one. Says, Marcus Carr is back in the transfer portal. Parker Stewart is as well. Jeff Capel needs to adjust quickly. Bringing in transfers to compete, it's the way of the land now in college hoops. I don't think there's any question about that, and I don't think Jeff Capel has any misgivings or misunderstandings about the state of things in college basketball. I mean, look, I think everyone sort of at their own pace is coming to this realization about what college basketball is these days and how you build a roster. But I think coaches have figured this out for a little while. And the ones who haven't figured it out are the ones who are going to struggle. They better figure it out quickly or else they're going to struggle with roster management over the next few seasons. I mean, this is what college basketball is now. Players have the freedom of movement. And that freedom is not going to be further restricted. You know, it's only going to move in the other direction where they're going to get looser and looser in the restrictions, and guys are going to be freer and freer to move around and change schools. And I don't think it's going to be complete free agency. It's not going to be complete wild, wild west. I think our the next step is one free transfer where you don't have to sit out, and that's probably where we will kind of get to and pause at for a little while. I think we'll get to that stage and sort of hang out there for a little while with guys having an opportunity for one free transfer. But that's what the sport is, and Jeff Capel understands that. And I always come back to this. If you listen to the podcast we had, it was a year ago at this time. We had a conversation with Jeff Capel, had him on the podcast as a guest. And this was after he had lost Trey McGowens and Ryan Murphy to the transfer portal and added some guys and this and that. And I said, Jeff, every year you've had transfers out. You've brought guys in as transfers. Is this something that comes along with a rebuilding process like what you're going through? Or is this just part of college basketball nowadays? And he said, this is what the game is. This is what the sport is. And this is what you have to learn to deal with. And this is what you have to learn to master. And this is what you have to learn to not manipulate, but it's what you have to learn how to manage. You have to, you have to rely on transfer. You have to expect transfers out, and you have to expect to bring transfers in. And that's how you're going to build your roster. And you're still going to get high school guys, and you're still going to evaluate and bring in kids and hope you can develop them over the course of 4 years. But you do that with the understanding that most of them you're not going to get the opportunity to develop over the course of 4 years. You do that with the understanding that most of those guys, or at least a significant percentage of those guys, are going to transfer out. Ideally you get to a point where they're leaving because they want to go to the NBA because they're that good. But the reality is, you're going to lose transfers, and you're going to lose them every year. And it's not a sign of the program falling apart. Because if Pitt is falling apart, and the way we know that is because Xavier Johnson, Audi's Tony, Gerald Drumgoole transferred, and I guess you could throw in Terrell Brown if you want. I mean, if that's the barometer we're using to show that the program is falling apart, then there are a lot of programs falling apart in college basketball right now. You know what I mean? Like, you can look around, look at the transfer portal, look at some of the Twitter accounts that cover the transfer portal, and look at the names going in there every day, and some of the names from the same schools going in there every day, and it's all across the country, and it's all levels. It's high major, it's mid major, it's D2, it's all over the place. This is what the sport is now. And football is like that to a large extent too. Now, football, you have so many guys, you have so many scholarships to give. You're not going to rely on transfers to build your roster. You're going to rely on transfers to sort of fill out your roster, to fill in a hole here or there, either short term or long term. Basketball, you're going to, year after year, rely on transfers. Transfers are going to be a big part of it every year. And it'll be the rare year that you don't lose any transfers or you don't bring in any transfers. That'll be the rare season. That'll be the oddity, the outlier. That's the nature of the thing. And coaches realize that. If they don't, like I say, they're putting themselves behind, because this is where you're building your roster now. And Jeff Capel, I mean, you look every day at the number of, the names of kids who are being tied to Pitt or saying that they have contact with Pitt. of transfers who are saying they've had contact with Pitt, and it's a big list. It's a long list. It's hard for us to even keep track of them because, you cast a wide net and you do as much evaluation and as much exploration as you can, and you have to go after it and see what you can find. Jason Martell with an interesting question. On the current Pitt basketball roster, whose development is the most crucial to next season's success? That's an interesting question, Jason. I like that question. On the current roster, I'm going to assume we don't include John Hughley there. I think that door is still open for him to come back. I think, depending on how his legal situation is resolved, John Hughley could still be part of this roster next season. But if we're not going to count him, and I think he would be important. I think he would be really important because, there's such a void at center right now. They need somebody to really come in and be an impact player. And I think they need to transfer most of all to do it. But they need, I think somebody like Hughley could be the guy. And Michael B. chimes in and says, Abdul Kareem Coulibaly. He said it 3 times here. Coulibaly, Coulibaly, Coulibaly. And, yeah, I guess the question with Coulibaly is just where the ceiling is. How good can Abdul Kareem Coulibaly really be? I sort of am of the mind that he's going to have a few outstanding games each season, probably 1 or 2 in the non-conference, where you look at it and say, boy, if he could keep up at something close to that level, he could be a really solid contributor in the ACC. And you could probably record what I just said and replay it in like late November, early December, and I'll be saying the same thing because he'll have a game where he goes for like 17 and 12 or something like that. Just some wild game like that. But I don't know if he can I don't know what he can consistently develop into. I don't know what his consistent ceiling is, or maybe how high his floor can consistently be. There's part of me that wants to say Femi Odekale. I think he can be the point guard of the future, at least for the next 2 or 3 years. But you need him to develop. There's obviously a lot of his game that needs to come along. Free throw shooting is a big part of it. He needs to just continue to learn how to be a point guard in the ACC, which I think he showed a lot last season that he's capable of doing it. But he's going to have to do it for a full season. His development's going to be really important. Josh Newark mentioned Ethio Horton, says Horton can't be so inconsistent. He needs to not have 0-point nights. Yeah, if you could get Horton to take a big step forward next year. Because when we look at things that are really missing from this roster, as it's currently constructed, or what was missing from this past season's roster, effective play in the post, a strong play at the center position is a big part. And then a real shooting threat. They didn't really have that. Horton is supposed to be that, but they didn't really have it. He didn't provide it. Now, other teams knew that was the only thing he was going to do. They knew that all he was going to, he was the shooting threat because he was the shooter, because he didn't really do much of anything else. But he wasn't consistent enough to use your word, Josh, he was too inconsistent at making shots. And that lessened sort of the threat that he presented on the court. He didn't really present enough of a threat because he didn't knock down enough shots. Him gaining some consistency over the offseason would be huge. His development, failing a big man, taking a big step forward, maybe I would go with Ethio Horton. That he needs to take a big step forward in being more consistent as a shooter so that other teams have to respect it. And if they don't respect it, or if they're slow to close out, they're slow to get there, he makes them pay every time. You see other teams do it. You see other teams do it against Pitt. When Pitt's 3-point defense is lazy, when their closeouts are lackadaisical, other teams are able to drain shots and make them pay. Pitt needs a guy who can do that. They don't have a guy who can do that. Maybe Nike Sabandi's shot develops a little bit more. Maybe him playing a full season, 30 games or something like that, and you can really see him flourish in that way. But Horton's the guy who needs to make those shots. Horton's the one who needs to be the real shooting threat. So maybe him. But I still think, the most crucial developments for Pitt's roster in terms of next season's success are Justin Champagnie coming back and getting a transfer big man. I still believe that. And somebody, I was having a conversation the other day with someone who, said, what are they realistically going to get? The really good players, the guys who can really make an impact and be a game changer, they're not going to come to Pitt. They're going to go somewhere else, particularly a center or something like that. And I think there's some truth to that. That was always my contention with junior college recruiting, football and basketball. When people say, oh, man, they got this hole at left tackle, or they got this hole at point guard, or not usually point guard, but maybe center. Got to go get a JUCO guy. And, what I would always say is that, look, there's only so many JUCO guys out there. And the really good JUCO guys, like in football, the really good JUCO players they're usually not going to Pitt. You know what I mean? They're going to the SEC. They're going to the Big 12. Sometimes some schools in the ACC, but for the most part, they're not coming to Pitt. And you think about junior college football players that Pitt has gotten over the years. Impact guys, Jeff Oda was really good. Played himself into a first-round draft pick. I don't really think of too many others. Lowell Robinson forced a fumble in the 13-9 game on a kickoff, or maybe recovered the fumble on the 13-9 game on a kickoff. But I mean, there's just not a lot that really pans out, and basketball is kind of the same way. I mean, there've been a few JUCOs who have succeeded. I mean, Ontario Lett is probably the one that most people point to, but I think it's tough sledding. It's hard to find those guys because there are only a few that are really going to make an impact at the high major level, and those guys probably aren't going to end up at Pitt. I mean, it's just sort of the reality of the situation. However, I think it's a different situation when you're talking about the transfer portal because there are just so many guys. The sheer volume of players who have gone into the transfer portal leads me to believe that if you do your due diligence, if you really grind and work and search through all of these guys and look for players who can really help you, you will find somebody out there, somebody who gets overlooked. And when you look at the NCAA tournament, you see some of these mid-major schools that have effective play in the post. It tells you that they're out there to be found. And if it's if some of these mid-major schools find these guys and develop them, and then you get them after 4 years or after 3 years, that's okay. That works. And there should be enough guys out there that Pitt can get one of them. Somebody to come in and play. I just think it's key. I think it's key. Josh Newark says, does Pitt want transfers with multiple years left of eligibility and hope to get a true diamond in the rough? Or should they focus on the experienced grad transfers who might have a low ceiling, but you get guys that have played? I mean, I think you want somebody who can come in and have a presence around the rim in the ACC. Somebody with the size to affect shots and make it difficult to drive. And then, can be effective rebounding and give you something on offense. And it doesn't have to be a dominant player. It doesn't have to be another guy who's going to average a double-double. But it has to be somebody who can hold his own and play competent basketball in the ACC. And I believe those guys are out there. And whether it's a guy with 2 years left or 3 years left, or it's a guy playing his final season of college basketball, they're out there. And you can find one. And as long as you can get him on the court this year, that's all that matters. Whether he's going to be here for 2 years or 1 year or 3. You need to get him on the court this year. And then you need to keep working to recruit young bigs that you can bring in and try and coach up and develop and hope they stick around and last. TRR says Horton, Jeffress, Collier, Koulibaly all improving and coming off the bench for a better starting lineup would be pretty great to see. The key is, can the transfers come in to give Pitt a solid starting five? Well, I think the 3 is going to be a really interesting position to watch this season, the small forward spot, unless you end up going with 3 guards, which if they bring in another transfer guard to go with Odekale and Sabandi and Horton, then maybe you can bring Horton off the bench and you could start 3 guards. But I think if that doesn't work, or if you don't want to start 3 guards, then I think Jeffress is probably going to have to be in the starting lineup, would be my sort of assumption. The roster as it's currently constructed, I would guess it's Odekale, Sabandi, Jeffress, Champagnie if he comes back, and Koulibaly. Now, you start bringing in transfers, you start changing those equations a little bit. You start changing that rotation, you start changing that lineup. But it seems to me that, I agree with you. If you could bring Horton off the bench, you could bring Collier off the bench. If you get a good big who allows you to bring Koulibaly off the bench, I think that's a pretty good way to go. If you can find a wing who can start and allow you to bring Jeffers off the bench, that would be good. I don't think it's a bad thing, and I don't think it's out of place or inappropriate or out of line or anything to expect Will Jeffers to be a big part of this rotation next season. I think he showed some flashes late in the year. I think he grew up a lot from the beginning of the season to the end, and I think he's going to grow up even more from now until the beginning of next season. And by then, I think he should be ready to step in and be a 30-game starter, 32-game starter, whatever they end up playing. I think you can go into next season with that expectation. I think you should go into next season with that expectation. Speaking of expectations for next season, I think every now and then, I'll say this, all right? I had a stretch there, certainly in February, even the early part of this month, where I really went back and forth on the Jeff Capel question. And we discussed it a lot here on the podcast and talked about it a lot on Panther-Lair.com and certainly in conversations with Pitt fans. I have these conversations all the time. And I go back and forth on it. How's the job that Capel's doing? How much time should he have? How far along should he be? And I got to be honest, this week, and I can't really put my finger on why it would be, or I can't say anything specific. Well, because of this, I'm now thinking this again. But I'm still pretty firmly in the camp that Capel is doing a good enough job that you don't really get him on the hot seat anytime soon. I think I know that we keep getting further and further away from the 0-18 season. I know we keep getting further and further away from those excuses, and I know those excuses keep being less and less relevant. I understand that. And I'm on board with that. And I think every year that passes, we can talk less and less about that 0-18 season, about taking over for Kevin Stallings. But I still don't think we can completely, even if we move further away from it, we can't completely ignore the fact that Capel didn't just have to start building. He didn't just start building from ground zero. He started from below zero. You know what I mean? With the roster he inherited, with the situation he inherited, with the state of Pitt basketball that he took over, with the perception of Pitt basketball, the perspective on Pitt basketball nationally, locally, in the conference, sort of regionally. He had to build just to get back to zero. And I really believe that. And, I think when you look at the job he has done in the last 3 seasons, I think he's improved the conference wins and win percentage every year. I think he has, he came in, I think the recruiting job to land Johnson, McGowans, and Tony in that first recruiting class, regardless of how it has worked out, I think they were good recruiting wins. He found Justin Champagnie. Champagnie had some offers, but nobody expected him to be the player that he is, and Capel found him and obviously was right on that one. Femi Odikale was another one that was an underrated guy, and didn't have the offer sheet, didn't have the ratings that, he looks like he should have merited. But credit to Capel for finding him. Credit to Capel for getting Will Jeffers. Credit to Capel for getting John Hughley. Credit to Capel for getting Nike Sabandi in here. Looks like a pretty good player. Looks like the kind of transfer that they need at center. A guy achieving at the mid-major level, you bring in and throw him into the mix in the ACC. And by the time Sabandi finally got settled in, he was playing really well. Good enough that I think he's a source of optimism for next year. Now, the last 3 seasons haven't been good. You can't sit here and say, boy, it's been really good under Jeff Capel. But I think you can sit here and say he started out with a monumental task. It's a task that wasn't easily achieved. It wasn't, it's a task that couldn't be done quickly, had to be built sort of slowly, and has continued, has has been a work in progress and hasn't been all steps forward. And this is, I understand this is the biggest frustration. This is the hardest part. This is what sort of sets fans back the most or frustrates fans the most, is that it's not all steps forward. That there's some steps forward and then there's some steps back. And it feels like there are more steps back than steps forward. And it feels like you take 2 steps forward and then 8 steps back or something like that. It feels like you get to a 4-1 start in the ACC and lose 6 out of the next 8 or whatever, 8 out of the next 10 or something like that. It's not easy. And I was looking at, when Ben Howland got to Pitt and the roster he inherited and the team he took over. And he took over a team that won, I think, 5 conference games the year prior to his arrival. And he took over a team that had Ricardo Greer, which those things alone, 5 conference wins and Ricardo Greer, puts the situation Howland inherited ahead of the situation that Jeff Capel inherited. And I'm not suggesting that Capel and Howland are the same level of coaches. I would contend that Ben Howland is a much better coach than, or I shouldn't say much better, but I would contend that Ben Howland is a better coach than Jeff Capel. And, so I'm not suggesting them to be equals. But what I am saying is that I don't think we're at the point where we can entirely lose sight of what Capel came in with and what he came in to do and what he was tasked with achieving. And I think he's made progress. And the departures of Johnson and Tony, I think, and McGowan's a year before, it stings and it sets the roster back and it sets that progress back. And we'll see, as time goes on, we'll see as time goes on the impact that those departures had. You know what I mean? If the idea is that there were locker room problems and culture problems, then we'll find out if there was some addition by subtraction. And looking at some of the comments here, like Matt Durney says, Mike Young at Virginia Tech lost his whole roster, brought in transfers, and made the tournament 2 years after Buzz bolted. Yeah, but I don't think Virginia Tech had sunk to the lows prior to Mike Young's arrival that Pitt sunk to. And I'm not saying that Jeff Capel is necessarily the answer. I'm not saying he's a great coach. He's definitely going to turn this thing around. But I think it's still a ways away from giving up on this project. And I think to give up on this project sooner than a few years from now is to downplay what Capel inherited, downplay the situation. Michael B says, Chris, next year will give all of us much more clarity if Capel is the answer here. Another late season slide, and that might put 2022 or make a break. But next season will give us a better field. The late season slide, Capel's record in February is worse than it is in December. I don't think there's any question about it. But you know what? I would say that's probably the case for almost every coach in the history of basketball because guess what? Look at the schedules in December and look at the schedules in February. Are you playing tougher competition in December or are you playing tougher competition in February? And the rosters just haven't been good enough over the past 3 seasons. They've been good enough to more or less hang in the non-conference, but then once they get into ACC play, they lose a bunch of games. They weren't good enough to finish games this past season. And there were a variety of reasons why that happened, and probably reasons that we can identify, and probably reasons that we're not really privy to. But like the late season slide thing, that's it was disappointing. It was frustrating after such a good start. But I'm not. I can't tell you why that happens, and I can't tell you what a coach would be doing that would cause that to happen. I can't sit here and tell you, well, Jeff Capel does this, and that's why his teams lose games in February. His teams lose games in February because they're not good enough to compete in the ACC yet, and they're playing all ACC games at that point. That's why they lose games in February, right? I think that's just me. I don't know, but we'll have these debates and discussions about Jeff Capel and the job he's doing at Pitt, we'll have these discussions for the next couple of years. S-Mac says all ACC teams play tougher games in February. Yeah, you're right. And all ACC teams probably have more losses in February than they do in December. Wouldn't you assume that to be the case? Unless you have like one or two outstanding teams at the top of the conference, they're all going to lose more games in February than they play in December. Anyway, we'll have these conversations a lot. I want to flip over to football here. We got about 15 minutes or so left. We usually like to go up until 9:30. Football team, no practice on Tuesday because they are on pause due to COVID-related protocols. And that's, I thought they were past this. You thought they were moved past this, that this kind of thing wasn't going to happen. You thought that they were in a position to, you thought they were further down the road. And not that you got lax. I don't think they loosened up on their restrictions or their policies or what they were trying to do. They certainly were testing a lot. That's how they found out about, these issues. Or I guess they were testing once a week now. But obviously some issues came up. And now they're not practicing. Practice is on hold. No real indication on how long this pause will last. They could be back on the practice field on Thursday as planned. They're on a Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday schedule. But we'll see. We'll see when they end up getting back. They will tell us when they end up getting back. We were supposed to have some interviews and that kind of thing here on Tuesday, but everything got put off because the football program's on pause. And it was sort of reality kind of coming back to us. And this is probably happening for everyone in life in general, right? That I think we keep feeling like we're very close to the finish line in this particular situation. And, some may be inclined to celebrate a little bit more than others. And, every now and then there was those reality slaps that say, hey, not done yet. We're not out of this yet. And I think Pitt football just got one of those. Kind of a reminder, certainly, I think as coaches like to say, a teaching moment. And I think they'll be using that as a teaching moment, just to remind the guys that look, you still need to do all the things that you did through the fall to largely stay out of trouble and have one game postponed. You need to, and obviously had a bunch of guys miss the Virginia Tech game and some even missed the Clemson game, but you're going to need to be very diligent and keep at it and vigilant and diligent and whatever else you want to say to make sure you get in more practices. They did get 4 practices down. They practiced last week, Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. 11 sessions to go, leading into the spring game in mid-April. And hopefully we'll all be able to be there, see a little live football in action. Spring practices, of course, have been closed to the media. Media hasn't been in the South Side, at least for Pitt, since March 6th of last year. I know it because I was there. I think I went down for that one. And so we haven't actually seen this team in any kind of practice situation in more than a year. So details are pretty spotty about what's going on with the team. But, this is one of these cases where I think we've got a real sense of what this roster is. I think we kind of know who they are. We know what the big questions are. We know what the big storylines are. We know the areas where this team needs to improve, where they need to play well. We know the holes they need to fill. We know on defense they've got openings in the starting lineup at both defensive end spots, one cornerback position, and at least one, if not two, really 2 safety spots. And one of the cornerbacks you're going to fill in with Damari Mathis, who was basically a starter in 2019 before he got hurt and had to miss the 2020 season. So you're locked up there. One of your safety spots, is the position left open by Paris Ford, who opted out at midseason. So you got a few games at the end of the season with Brandon Hill in the starting job there. But, you've got a few holes to fill there. Offensively, you've got a couple spots on the offensive line where you lost seniors. That's kind of it. You really pretty much bring everyone else back. Matt Durney asked, Jimmy Morrissey's replacement next year will be key. Who's going to be the likely center? And it seems like Owen Drexel is the front runner at this point. Redshirt senior now. And been around for a long time, played in the Boston College, started and played the whole Boston College game last year. And so he seems like he's the front runner to take over from Morrissey at center. But you're replacing Morrissey at center and you're replacing Bryce Hargrove at left guard. And so, Drexel, veteran player, ready to step into the starting lineup, it seems. And then Marcus Minor, the transfer from Maryland, another veteran guy, looks like he's ready to step into the starting lineup at left guard. So, the offense being the big question mark of this team, the offense being the key to whether or not this team can succeed in 2021, they've got all their guys back. There shouldn't be any real personnel issues, at least in terms of replacing starters, unless somebody gets hurt. There shouldn't be any real personnel issues that hold this team back on offense. And I think on defense, and I think we've talked about this before. I actually wrote about it in the 321 column on Panther-Lair.com late last week on Friday. I said that, we're really going to get a sense of how good this defensive recruiting has been this year, because you're going to be relying on some of these younger guys to step in at defensive end. The defensive tackles, they all played last year, but they're all younger guys except for Keyshawn Camp. You're going to be looking at some younger guys at safety. And, you have a couple younger guys in the mix at linebacker as well. You're going to find out about some of this defensive recruiting, but I'm pretty bullish on the group. I'm pretty bullish on this defense and their ability to fill in for the guys they lost and kind of keep up their strong play from last season. And we can go back and forth about how well they actually played or if they, left something to be desired, et cetera, et cetera. But I think, I'm bullish on the defensive players. And you've got offense, you've got all these guys coming back, all these experienced players. And the thing I've sort of been thinking this week, and this is, funny thing to talk about in the last few minutes of the show, we'll definitely talk about it a lot over the next few months, kind of feel like Pitt football's past the point of excuses. I don't know I don't even remember what the excuses were in 2019. But certainly last year, COVID, it was the COVID year. There was that. 2018, well, they couldn't throw the ball at all. They had this or that. 2017, they had quarterback issues. There have been, and to the football team's credit, coaches and players, it's not like they don't dwell on these excuses, but we out here, media and fans, we do. And I think there have been excuses for a lot of the past 5 or 6 seasons of why it went the way it went. This year, barring any kind of injuries, particularly to key players, I don't see a lot of reason or area for excuses. And I don't see a lot of allowance for excuses. This feels very much like a put up or shut up season. You got your quarterback back. You've got all these offensive linemen back. You got all your skill guys, your receivers and your running backs returning. You've got the tight end who was supposed to be a big part of your offense last year, and then he got hurt. You've got him back. Defensively, you've got a bunch of starters back. You lost quite a few important starters, but you've recruited defense very well, or so we've been told over the past 5 years. So I don't see a lot of areas where you could say, well, that's a built-in excuse for this team. I guess kicker. They got to replace Alex Kessman. They don't have a kicker. But if the kicker is the difference between 10 wins and 7 wins, then if their games are that close that the kicker is the difference between 10 wins and 7 wins, then they've got bigger problems than the kicker, and they've got bigger problems than anything we're talking about right here. But I do feel like for this program, for Pat Narduzzi, it's past the point of excuses. But this is just sort of something that bounced into my head this week as I was thinking about Pitt football and what this upcoming season looks like. We obviously have a lot of time between now and then to talk about a lot of time to talk about what this season is going to be. A couple quick comments here before we jump out. S. Max says very excited to see Khalil Anderson. He'll be the 2021 breakout freshman, the like Jordan Addison was in 2020. I think Khalil Anderson, the cornerback out of Atlanta, is going to be really good. It'll be interesting to see how he fits into the rotation this season. You've got Damari Mathis back. You've got Marquez Williams back. You've got A.J. Woods returning. You got Rashad Battle, who played last season as a freshman. But Anderson's really good, arguably the best recruit in the 2021 class. Just the same, like you said, as Jordan Addison was probably the best recruit in the 2020 class. Is Anderson going to get the opportunities that Addison got? Remains to be seen. I think Addison walked into sort of a weaker situation, a situation that was better suited for a freshman to step in and play the role that he played. But Anderson's really good. He's going to have a chance. Josh Newark says, law of averages says this year Pitt gets production out of the tight ends. Lucas Krull is healthy. Kenny Pickett said Gavin Bartholomew is a stud. Calling it now, Pitt will have tight end success. I mean, at some point, the tight ends got to catch a couple freaking balls, right? At some point, the tight ends have to start contributing to this offense, right? Lucas Krull is supposed to be pretty good. Supposed to be able to catch, supposed to be able to run. Last year, we didn't see him do either of those things. He had like 5 targets in the Syracuse game. He caught one of them and dropped some others and got hurt. So we didn't see him do any of the things he was supposed to be able to do in the brief amount of time that we actually saw him. So, we'll find out. We'll find out. Dan Juby says the running game has to improve in 2021, right? Yeah, you know what's funny, Dan? I mean, that you say that. I'm finding that with a lot of things related to this team, I'm just sitting here saying, I mean, it has to get better, right? And I'm not saying that to mock you, Dan. I feel the same way. Like we just said about the tight ends, they have to actually get better at some point, right? This offense actually has to get better at some point, right? Well, the running game has to actually get better at some point, right? And I mean, if the O-line can block, that would be that would be an important step in the right direction. We talked to Carter Warren last week, veteran offensive lineman, starting left tackle from last season, and he said, yeah, they need to do better in the run game. That's one of their big points of emphasis this offseason. They realize it, they acknowledge it just the same as you and you and I acknowledge it. But realizing you need to be better at something and actually being better at something are two different things. Josh Newark says, come on, Pete, call it now. 10 wins or bust. I mean, they should. At some point you got to break through. You got to have success. At some point, you've built your roster. You've coached these guys up. You've evaluated them. You've developed them. You got to win with them. And this looks like as good a year as any. All right, you want to have more of these kinds of conversations, you got to go to Panther-Lair.com. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, recruiting. You can find it all at Panther-Lair.com. And, of course, we have message boards where you can interact with lots and lots of other Pitt fans. Just like these conversations we're having here tonight on the Panther-Lair Show, you can have those conversations on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. It's Panther-Lair.com. Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Don't forget about Home Field Apparel. Home Field, I mean, you spell it like you hear it. Homefieldapparel.com. Great Pitt shirts. I got one on tonight. Super soft, great design, super comfortable. It's just a great shirt. So I can't recommend them enough. Homefieldapparel.com. Saturday morning, 10 a.m. this week. Bouncing back and forth between some times. But Saturday morning at 10 a.m., we've got the Panthers Insider Show on Sports Radio 93.7 The Fan. Tune in for that. For more Pitt sports talk right there on The Fan. Panthers Insider Show. It's 93.7 The Fan, 10 a.m. Make sure you tune in for that because we'll have more Pitt talk. We'll talk about some of the things we talked about here tonight. Anything else that comes up between now and Saturday. So I think that's everything, right? The website, Home Field, the Panthers Insider Show. Next Tuesday night, we'll be right back here at 8:30 for another live stream, another podcast where you can get in, have a conversation, and talk about some Pitt sports. YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. If you're watching the live stream on Tuesday night, we appreciate everybody who's liking the video. That's great. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's key. Get those subscribers going. That'll let you know when we go live, because sometimes there's breaking news, and we'll jump in here and hit a live stream and react to it right away. So you don't want to miss that. Make sure you subscribe to Panther-Lair on YouTube. YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Thanks, everybody, for jumping in the comments. Thanks, everybody, for following along on the live stream tonight. Thanks for everybody listening to the podcast through the week. You have a great rest of the week. Hope you have a great weekend. We'll talk to you Saturday morning with the Panthers Insider Show, and then we'll be back here next Tuesday night, 8:30 p.m., the Panther-Lair Show, YouTube.com. Thanks again. Have a great week.